Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy.
Hello and welcome. My name is Jacob Steele, the events manager for Banyan Books and Sound. Today we are delighted to be hosting Elizabeth Cunningham in conversation with Barbara McHugh on Elizabeth's book, The Wild Mother. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that although we have participants that join from around the world, the physical location of Banyan Books is on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Elizabeth and Barbara welcome your questions. Please type your questions into the chat box at any point during the live event. And if you have any tech questions, you can email them to events@banyan.com, and we'll be checking that throughout the event. A special note that Elizabeth Cunningham's books are 10% off via Banyan's website for the next 10 days. So if you purchase the book through the website, just enter the code WILDMOTHER, and that's all one word. And now for introductions. Elizabeth Cunningham is the descendant of generations of Episcopal priests. She's the best-selling, award-winning author of the Maeve Chronicles, which includes The Passion of Mary Magdalen and the other titles. Other books include The Return of the Goddess and How to Spin Gold. She's in private practice as a counselor and a fellow emeritus of Black Earth Institute. Her book, The Wild Mother, is described as a modern fairy tale and bold biblical midrash, filled with psychological depth and imaginative originality. I'll show you the book cover. There it is. Publishers Weekly describes it as a beguiling tour de force. Barbara McHugh is the author of several works, including The Bride of the Buddha, a novel. She holds a PhD in religion and literature and is a longtime Buddhist practitioner. Barbara is on the board of directors of Marin Sangha, where she leads meditation courses. So without further ado, it's a great honor to welcome them. Please welcome Elizabeth Cunningham and Barbara McHugh.
So hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Barbara. And I want to, before we get started, I'm sure Barbara and I both want to say thank you to Banyan Books and to Jacob Steele for hosting us. And thank you, Barbara, for reading the book. And great questions. Barbara and I met through reading books. I read Barbara's book, Bride of the Buddha, and I interviewed her, and now the shoe's on the other foot. So we'll see how it goes. But I recommend her book highly, and I'm very happy to be in conversation with her. Over to you, Barbara.
Okay, well, I recommend your book highly. And what's amazing to me is I'm so glad I read the book. And it's one of those books you could read over and over again because it's packed with so much. I mean, it's got the fairy tale, it's got the myth, it's got characters, themes, plenty of plot twists. I mean, it's just marvelous. And every time I read it, there are more comes out. So I want to know, first off, and I think readers want to know how you came to write this novel. Whether the story came to you first, or did some character or theme, or what provided maybe an initial spark?
So I for people that haven't read The Wild Mother is Lilith, who was the apocryphal first wife of Adam, but this is not an allegorical book. It really is a modern fairy tale. And there are characters who happen to have the names Adam, Eva, or Ava, I usually call her. And so it centers around Lilith as the wild mother. So I'll say a little bit more about her in a bit. But how I came to write the book, which is having its 30th anniversary of publication. But I began to write it actually in 1976 when I was a senior in college, and I had applied to get into a creative writing course, and I was rejected. So this book was the first of many, 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 many rejections began there. And I had gone to summer school. I had gotten extra credits so that I could just take this elective course. So I decided that I was not going to take a fourth course. I didn't need the credit. I was just going to write. And I prevailed upon my American literature section person teacher to be my mentor. And I began writing frantically to prove that I could write. And I wrote, I don't know what I was writing, but it was definitely not working. I was writing about things that held no interest for me, that I knew nothing about, that I did not understand plot. I was writing and writing and writing. And I think one of the turning points for me in my life as a writer was that, which was just beginning, is that I actually showed all that awful material to my mentor. And he actually read it, and he couldn't even critique it. It was so bad. And so, yeah. So the thing that he said that I think is very key here for the wild mother is, he said, go home, think about fairy tale. There are only 5 or 6 plots in the world. Think about fairy tale. So I went back to my little one-room apartment, and I looked around my where I lived, and I had a map of make-believe on the wall. Of course, I was a reader of the Narnia books, and I had a little heather plant, and I remembered how I used to look at, as a child, you make little worlds and you enter them, you see the moss as being a forest. I thought, oh, fairy tale. So I spent the weekend thinking about fairy tale, and someone asked me, what are those 5 or 6 plots? And I don't know that I can pinpoint them, but one of the ones that came to me was loss and reunion, not knowing and finding, seeking and finding, quest. And so I spent the weekend thinking about those things. And on my way to school, I can still remember the street, and I can remember the litter in the gutters, and I can remember the cast of light. Suddenly it came to me that there was someone who was the wild mother. And her daughter and the other people around her did not know where she was. Her daughter she had left her daughter, and her daughter didn't know how to find her or even who she was. So that was the premise. And then so all 6 of the human characters came to me on the way to school. And I knew that the central character was Lilith, the wild mother, partly because I had recently read a midrash by Judith Plaskow, a little short midrash positing that Lilith left the Garden of Eden and climbed over the wall because she wanted to. She wanted to be wild. And then later when Eve came along, one day they met at the wall, looking over the wall at each other, communicating with each other and forming a sisterhood. And that really appealed to me. And so that was the kernel of the book. That's how it came, and that's how it grew.
Yeah, I love that part of the book. And I want to know, though, over the last 30 years, how your attitude has changed toward Lilith, or has it changed?
Well, I think that one of the things is it's called the wild mother. And I think a lot of what I'm pondering in that book is what is wild? What is human? What is the relation of humans to the wild? And so each of the characters has their own relationship, whether it's longing, terror, desire to control, desire to all the kinds of attitudes that humans have towards the wild. And I think one of the things that's changed for me over the years is that I don't see them. I think I'm much more interested in how are we also wild? And how do we relate to our own wildness and our own humanness, so that I don't see them as so distinct. But at the time, I was positing my first question and also one of the things that I always do in all my novels is there does seem to be one world and another world, and there's traffic back and forth, and each world changes the other. So I think that was the first time it's like, okay, so here's the human world and there's the wild world. I called it the empty land. It was very influenced by my time in Scottish Highlands. So I think, though, that I think that I don't see the wild. I think that part of the problem in the world is that in the Western world, is that we've historically seen the wild or nature or whatever it is as other, as something that's supposed to be controlled or subdued, bought or sold, exploited. And, because we talk about being out in nature. And so that started to bother me. It's like, well, what is nature? What are we? When are we not in nature? When are we not made of the same elements as everything else? So I think that was the beginning of all those questions that go on.
Yeah, what's fascinating to me about Lilith is that in a way, I mean, she's not just a stereotype of nature. I mean, she's like, you always hear about nature being red and claw and toothed and everything, and that animals kill each other to live, but she is completely at peace with other creatures. She doesn't eat meat. She doesn't wear fur. And so she's some kind of new possibility of being. And that's what one of the things that fascinates me about her. I almost see her in certain ways as sort of embodying the road not taken for human emotion. She is this other being that chose to almost a road not taken for reality. Her whole look, how she sees death or doesn't see death, how it affects her, how she never ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So she in some ways doesn't know about it. So she has this innocence, but she also
has an innocence.
And she has this coldness, but she also has this wisdom. And it's just what also makes it fascinating to me is that I've read about, like tribal people, like some of the Brazilian tribes who are so different from normal, quote unquote, Western or even Eastern people, and that they've chosen a different path. They have no creation myths. They have their language is very difficult to understand or learn. And there's a book out by a Christian missionary who went to convert them, and he ended up losing his faith. Now, this tribe, the Paraha, that's what they're called, I believe. It's been a while since I've read about them. But this faith, he just couldn't put the world together anymore. And so it's very interesting to me to see this character sort of beyond time, embodying certain possibilities of humanity. How do we integrate that? How do we integrate this wildness and sort of take back our own innocence in some ways, and yet maintain the compassion and warmth that humans have, because they know they're mortal.
And Lilith doesn't live by herself in the wild. She lives with all the other wild women.
Right.
She's apparently the ninth to bear the name of Lilith from the original Lilith. I have to say that I'm glad that it works, because I think that, that phrase, willing suspension of disbelief. I really ask that of my readers always in all my books. Like, how about some bungee jumping of disbelief? Just strap it on, jump off the bridge and go with it. Suspend your disbelief, because the setting, one of the main settings, is the house that is surrounded by a wall that is unclimbable, and beyond it is the empty land. And apparently it's okay. Nobody has to say, well, where is that, and why is that there, and how does that work? It just works. So Lilith lives in the empty land with the other wild women. And Lilith doesn't eat meat. That was way before I became a vegetarian. She just, I didn't know anything about being a vegetarian. But so I don't know. All of this came out of my imagination. I was 22 years old, and I just went with it, whatever came up. And I guess what's fascinating is that Lilith comes back to the human beings to find her daughter, and then she gets trapped there. And then I think a couple of people have pointed out something to me I think you have and other people have, that even though I'm like Lilith is wild and the humans are humans, is that there really is an exchange. And Lilith becomes very attached to the humans, including her mother-in-law, who's a very peppery old woman who wants to clean everything and thinks that nature is rather messy. So they both change. Both the old woman, the mother-in-law, and Lilith they form an alliance, they form a bond. So it really is about connection also.
Yeah. I think that change is one of the reasons why we're willing to suspend disbelief. I mean, wow, what's going to happen next? How is she going to get this together? And you always manage to. And it's really interesting that you don't see nature as other. I mean, I'm always thinking though, you don't write in Lilith's point of view. And you mentioned in another interview that was a conscious decision you made. But my question is, would you ever consider writing something in her point of view? I'd love to see a sequel of this book.
Yeah, well, who knows? Maybe there will be. I think that was a deliberate choice, because I think that one of the things that's fun about being a novelist, and that this was my first novel that I wrote, was, I get to see, you get to see the same person, Lilith, in this case, from 6 different points of view. And I always anchor whatever scene I'm writing is from someone's perspective. And some of the perspectives are much more sympathetic than others. There are 2 children, the 10-year-old girl, Ionia, a 6-year-old boy, Fred, the grandmother character, who's the Lilith's mother-in-law, named Grammar, and then the rather evil Adam. Yes. And then Eva, who is sort of like the human mother, kind of like on the edges of all these lives, not sure of who she is to Adam, not sure of how she fits with anything. She's a widow. She's the mother of Jason, who's another of the points of view. And so I just love and still love, I think it's one of the most wonderful things about reading fiction and writing fiction. I love that we can see from more than one point of view. And that the story all stories have more than one point of view. So
to me, that's the redemptive power of fiction and the reason for fiction to continue. Because to be able to adopt another person's point of view is so important. And then when you look at all of the problems and suffering, everything that's going on in the world, it's because people don't see beyond their point of view. They don't see beyond themselves. And in your story, it also portrays how people become trapped in themselves and trapped in their point of view. And Adam, who's so chillingly evil at first, manages to be redeemed. Sorry for the spoiler. Won't say how it happens. But he does have to enter the dark night of his own prison of a self.
Yes.
And he has to let go. And that's one of the more amazing themes in the book, is the themes of resurrection and redemption and dying and being reborn. And what are you dying to? And I think a lot of these characters die to the smaller self, some small self. And everyone, and again, with the 6 different points of views, they all have different small selves to die to. The little boy, Jason, first of all, has to die to his very stiff kind of little scientific view. Then he has to die to his illusion of wanting to be a hero. And he can, he's improved. He's going to save. He's not going to put Ionia in the mental institution anymore. He's going to save her.
Won over, he wants to be a hero. As soon as he starts being an enemy, be a hero and a savior. And he does get over that. Yeah.
Right. And he has to, and then all of them just recognizing that, I wasn't thinking of other people here. In one way or another, they managed to get back into the world. And certainly some of them require more radical death scenes than others.
The woman who's Eva or Ava, I always called her Ava, but it's spelled E-V-A. She very much, she's the one that has to learn to be fierce. She's the one that has to find her own strength. And she seems like a very mousy, accommodating, will do anything for anyone kind of person. And she is. And that is something that she has to die to.
Right. Yes.
In order for anything to change.
And that's one of the more interesting themes that goes along with the whole redemption is this character's need to control. And everybody needs to control something. She controls her emotions, her behavior. She has a certain Eva, this is the certain self that she has to be. And when she becomes wild, she has to die to that self. And
I suppose she does become, she reclaims her own wildness.
Right, yes.
And Ionia, who's really protected herself by being very separate from everyone.
Right. Yeah.
And who is longing for her mother and wants to be with her mother, also has to recognize her relationship with the other human beings.
Yeah, and I thought that was wonderfully done. It was sort of like suddenly she hadn't been thinking about Fred, and she hadn't been thinking about Grandma, and all of a sudden she realizes how much she cares. And that's just so beautifully the way that all kind of flows together in different parts of the book. And
I think the thing that as we're talking about it, it sounds as though I knew a lot more about what I was doing than I did. So I think that the other thing about fiction that I love reading it and writing it is that, and writing this book was my first experience of really writing sustained fiction, was that all those characters, I found out what was going to happen and the plot unfolded. It's not that I didn't have an idea of the plot. Okay, so there's a wild mother. Where is she? How does she come back? What happens? I had a sort of a framework, but I didn't have anything like an outline. And I think the way the characters transform and the way the plot unfolds is about actually living inside them. So that is how I like to write. I know that sometimes with mystery novels, which I also love mystery novels, and I did write one, and I did have to figure out how the plot worked, but there was so much that surprised me.
Yeah, that is really the joys of writing fiction to me too. That you go on this journey, and sometimes I usually have some goal, think, okay, I'd like this character to transform in this way, but there's a certain point where I have to just let go of that and say, are you going to do it? And then go in that character. And sometimes, oh no, I wanted my character to become enlightened at the end. And yet, she had been the bride of the Buddha, and then she was disguised as a monk. And was she going to become enlightened? Well, yes and no.
She kind of filled out.
And so I've used some history, and I used history as written in the scriptures, and I just went there with it.
And she would never deny her own experience. She didn't exalt it. Sometimes she put herself down for it even, but she never denied the truth of it.
Yeah. Right, yeah. And it's just sort of like following that, or following your characters, and sort of having this strong sense of what their values are. Yeah. And I think so much of fiction is this transformation of values and a clarification of values. And certainly when you see your characters in The Wild Mother, they have very strong values. That's one of the things I love about
having values. I just thought of them as being themselves. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there is,
And that's what makes them empathetic, because even if you kind of go yuck, you sort of see, well, there's a sense of something here that is of value. That's why I loved Ursula as a character.
But one thing that I realized that is very uncomfortable too, it's challenging and uncomfortable, and I continued throughout my writing life to try to see those points of view, but to write from the point of view of someone who's really cruel or evil is scary. And I think that I also found out, I'm not writing autobiographical fiction. None of these characters is me. Probably Ionia was more than any of the others. But it's like, I'm also Adam and Jason. And how do I know about that? Where'd that come from? So you really have to, it's not that it's like when they say you have a dream and you have to, and they say, well, look at every character, including like the kitchen table or whatever, as if it's you, and you have to see from that point of view. So it's like, it's pretty, if the characters transform, well, so does the reader and the writer, if they go with it. Yeah,
you have to. And when you get into these very negative, cruel characters, you need to travel back to their vulnerability and to their terror.
That's the only place redemption comes from,
Excuse me, that's what. Yeah.
I think if there is redemption, and I think it was you, Barbara, who said, "Oh gosh, this book seems more Christian than the Maeve Chronicles, which is about the Passion of Mary Magdalene,"
Right.
and it's like, oops. Well, I guess I was raised that way. I grew up in the church, and I grew up hearing those stories. And I think that what you just said about vulnerability, I think you just said something about that. It's like there are awful characters in the Bible too, really awful characters, and they're human. And it's like, and very often you have to enter into those points of view and you have to deal with that. It's like, oh, it's not just the good people that are in this story, it's all the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the thing that makes you be able to connect with them rather than just write a character off is the vulnerability.
Yeah.
And there has to be some way in. I mean, sometimes if I'm watching a movie or reading a book and there is no way for me to connect with that character because I can't touch that humanity in them, I just stop. And the most awful character can get to you if they become vulnerable.
Right, yeah, if you understand it, there, but for the grace of God go I. Were I that person in those circumstances, I would have made that terrible choice. Or at least that choice would have been a very, very strong temptation. And that I think, and that again gets back to, it's so important to be able to recognize this, in one's life, in your daily life, that yes, this person, even though they are evil, are still, I had a friend who say, somebody's child.
Yeah.
Still somebody's child, and Lord knows how they came to this. Sometimes I think about Trump being bullied as a kid or oppressed by his father. Something happened to him. Excuse me, any of you Trumpites out there, but
I think I'm having my first my nonfiction debut in the fall, and called My Life as a Prayer. And because I like to talk to characters, I talk to everybody. I have dialogue with everybody. So I think I once said to whoever it was I was talking to, whatever deity name you want to use or whatever concept of the divine you want to use, I basically said, well, how can you? I take it on faith that you love all these people, but I don't get it. How do you do it? And it's like, I don't want to do it. You do it. And the answer was, well, we actually see that person or those people as infants. And I said, oh. And he said, the voice I was speaking to said, that's how we see all of you, as infants.
As what? I'm sorry, the word?
It's babies. Like we see you.
I thought you said insects for a minute.
Love this person. How can you do this? How can you do that? I'm not doing it. You do it. I often say that to whoever I speak to in prayer. It's like, I can't do it. Over to you. And then, so when he said, well, we see all of you as infants. And I said, oh, is that a good way to pray for someone? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in Buddhism, yeah.
Because people aren't responsible for their actions. They are.
Right. No, in Buddhism, there's a loving kindness meditation where very often you start out meditating on someone and wishing them well. And if you can't get to them, meditate on them as a child. And very often Westerners in particular can't meditate on themselves and wish themselves well. And so try to meditate on yourself as this little child, and of course that's Jesus' whole
Or
shtick.
to realize that whoever and whatever the divine is, whether it's within or out, if you can't, the divine can do it. You don't have to do everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how has your relationship or your attitude toward the divine changed over the 30 years?
Oh, it's just changed and changed and changed. Well, the next book that's going to come out, which is also very elderly, The Return of the Goddess.
Yes.
And I'll tell another little story. Because I was raised Christian, I went through a period where I really tried to be a very devout Anglican Christian. And that's actually when I was writing The Wild Mother. I thought I was like, Mom, C.S. Lewis, come back in female form. Yeah, whatever. And then I remember at one point I was in crisis in my life a few years later. And I had written several books by then, none of them published. It took me forever to get published, forever and ever. It's at least one eternity. But I was in the middle of actually having a miscarriage, my second miscarriage. And I don't know, maybe I was distracting myself from what I was going through. I was on my way to a doctor's appointment, and I asked myself, I said, I wonder why I've never written, at that point, I had never written about the church. I have since then. Why have I never written about that? Like, that's how I grew up. I've never written about Jesus. I've never written about God. I've never written about the church. I wonder why that is. And then I heard a voice that said, you've been looking for me all your life. Think about what you have written. The Wild Mother. And then another book I wrote was from the point of view of a female, of a wise woman who lived in the wood, a retelling of the Rumpelstiltskin story. And it's like, what do you think you've been writing about? You've been looking for me. Here I am. And so that was how the goddess came into my life and shook everything up. So, and when that happened, I felt like, oh my goddess, now what? And like, what does that mean about Jesus? And what does that mean about and I thought, oh, do I have to make a choice? And that was really scary. And so because I'm a novelist, I finally figured out, no, you can just write from all those points of view. You can hold all those points of view. You can, and there's the Passion of Mary Magdalen. Because Maeve, my Celtic Mary Magdalen, is a lover of Jesus, but she's never a convert. She's never a Christian, although her behavior might be called Christian. And I thought, I don't have to make these choices. These are false choices. And I know at the end of The Wild Mother, which was published 14 years after I finished it, I wrote a poem, and I can't remember it very well. It's probably in there somewhere. But basically, it was a question that was posed to me, I think, by the proofreader. It's like, well, why did you make Ionia make that choice between wild and human? What is that choice about? Why did you do that to her? Spoiler alert. And so it's like, I think part of my evolution as a writer is to say, wait a minute, the things that we think are opposed, why are they opposed? And so we're certainly in a period of time now where we are very much encouraged to see the other as other and the other as demonic, irredeemable, destroying the world. I mean, we all do it. So yeah, it's like, that's part of what I've been trying to do all my life. It's like, no, you don't have to choose between the goddess and Jesus. No, you don't have to choose between wild and human. No, these things are not opposed. They're all there.
But it was really interesting that the choice was made by Ionia at one point, and there were reasons for the choice. And I really felt, I loved that it sort of, there was an ambiguous note at the end, but I also loved that she made the choice. And I'm wondering, because this is something that's sort of myth rewritings that have been going on. You know, I think of the novel Circe, which she makes the choice. She chooses mortality in a way, but she chooses it partly because the knowledge of death, that sense of death, gives her that compassion, gives her that way into seeing other people's vulnerability, and she wanted that kindness. And that's the one thing that Lilith at least in The Wild Mother, didn't really get. She didn't understand. She understood friendship, but she didn't understand this kind of love or kindness in a way. I think
that's how I wrote it. And I think that being able to look at mortality is really important, because I think a lot of what we do as humans is to deny it.
Wow.
I mean, we don't have, nothing has to, our food is wrapped in plastic. Nothing is going to die. Nothing's going to decay. We can have everything at our fingertips at all times. And that's partly why we're in the mess that we're in. But it's true. Ionia had to choose mortality and choose human connection. Oh, these are all, well, you can read the book anyway. It's a good story.
It's a fabulous story.
But what was I going to say? Oh, I know that one thing that came to bother me about human beings, many things bother me about human beings, for my father-in-law, who I never knew, and people, a lot of the ecologists from, the age of John Burroughs or whatever, they were really good observers and they loved nature, but they saw it as, I had to stop reading John Burroughs one day because he said, well, I shot a loon and then the mate was upset. Isn't that interesting? And it's like, so that's another thing that I feel like we see human beings as being so different and so other than other animals, and we're not. Other animals mourn, other animals have rituals, trees have relationships with each other, they can show compassion to each other. And I think probably somewhere in me, I was trying to explore that and reach that and still am. But I feel like it was so, I feel like to see anything in nature as other, it bothers me now. It's like, even though
no, because what it is it's a complete objectification, and it goes beyond arrogance. What really bothers me is that people always talk about evolution in purely mechanistic terms. Like these animals blindly obey these instincts and they're like machines. Because we have the arrogance to compare them to what we have invented. We've invented machines. And so now, yes, everything is just DNA. We just have to transfer DNA, and that's what it's all about. And that explains evolution. It doesn't. Animals love to look pretty for each other. They prune, they have aesthetic choices. They make that sometimes over survival. Of course they have to survive. You can't have beauty without something to be beautiful. But this idea that nature is this mechanized machine.
Right. And that birds only sing because it's what they're programmed to do.
Programmed. I mean, another human thing. Well, the brain is a computer. No, the brain, it has aspects of computing, but oh man.
And that comes back to that makes me think again of why it is that I like to read, and especially, read and write fiction. The element of surprise not that I experience the element of surprise when I write, but I'm thinking there must be that element of possibility and surprise in the whole of creation. Just as you're saying, it's not like everything is foreordained and has to work out in this mechanistic way. There's all kinds of surprises.
Well, part of evolution is this idea of novelty, that life seeks novelty in a way. I mean, Alfred North Whitehead once said, if it was all about survival, well, a butterfly has a much less, has a far worse survival rate than a stone. A stone survives very well. Why be a butterfly if you could be a stone? And I think that there is this sense in all of nature toward this beauty and connection, and even a mystery. And sort of to deny that, it's not just to say that there's not a place to talk about things in terms of mechanisms or computers, but to reduce everything to this.
Yeah, to be reductive, whatever the system is. If it's reductive, that's a problem. Yeah, when I pray for things, I like to pray for other than human beings, and I realize that the word species there's language that bothers me. It's like, I like the word kind and I like the word being. So I might pray for canine beings or marine beings or whatever. But I feel like I feel like there is a shift that's happening now where people are beginning to see, oh no, we are meant to be part of something. We are part of something. And if we separate ourselves from it, that tears the fabric of creation. So I think the Wild Mother was, like I say, the beginning of my questions and my quest, which is not done yet, clearly.
Well, another change that has happened in society and that evolves is the whole thing about man versus woman and what it is to be masculine, feminine. And I realized when I was formulating the question to how has this changed for you, it's sort of almost like I don't want to ask it in those terms anymore. I want to say, what is it like to be a gendered being? How to.
And Ursula Le Guin was exploring that long ago, wasn't she?
Yes, that the left hand of darkness.
Yeah.
That was that wonderful book where males and females went in between, and you choose one. You choose to have a child, so you went into they called Kemmer, which was this kind of, I forget because it's been years since I read it. It's a kind of you were a sexual being. You could either be a male or a female. And other times you were sort of neuter. You could just kind of go about your business.
It's a really interesting. I mean, I think that would be probably one of the things that goes on changing for me. I mean, certainly in The Wild Mother, there's a lot about men and women and wildness and humanness and femaleness and maleness. Someone accused me of being unfair to men. I mean, I've explored the male-female thing a lot, but wait till you get to meet Maeve's daughter. And I didn't even know about non-binary at the time, but I realized that that's also changing for me too. Not that I don't identify as a woman and haven't always, but I do remember being a child and saying, on the playground, I can picture myself at the jungle gym thinking very hard and saying, well, I'm not a boy, but I'm not a girl either. So I think some interesting things are happening in how we think about what it is to be human, what it is to be alive, what it is to be made of earth, air, fire, and water, being of one substance with this planet. I think there's a lot that's happening. And I think that storytellers and other artists are dreaming it. I mean, that's part of the job, really, is to imagine things that haven't been imagined or to reimagine them. If a story is a great story, you get to tell it again, at least every generation.
And then, and the story just provides those possibilities. I mean, that's why I liked writing about monks, because I had a monk acquaintance who would say to a fellow monk, to a woman, a nun, we're a third gender. That to be a monk, and to sort of be, I like to think, sort of like the default person. I'm a person first. I may be characterized by my gender, or whatever it is, or non-binary, or female gender, or something else, but I'm not defined by it. It's not. It doesn't. I'm not reduced to it. I'm not. I'm not limited by it in that way. And
we can go both ways, I think, with that. I mean, we're sort of talking about reconceiving ourselves, but also to go deeply into what it is to be female is very important too. It was certainly very important to me. I mean, we're kind of rambling along, but I realized that for me to be able to conceive of God as female was really hugely important. So even as I start to say, wait a minute now, I don't want to sell short what feminism has brought to the world, and what goddess religion has brought to the world always. So I think we can both explore that we're not defined by gender and embrace.
Right, because that's the characterization. What is the potential there too? Besides, the potential, in some ways, your limitations do define your potential, but to understand that, to embrace it,
embracing it was really, really important for me, because I mean, I grew up in a church where every week I said, I believe in God the Father and God the Son and God the, and so it was huge to me to be able to say, to be able to experience in my body and my soul, God as female.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, particularly if you're brought up with that patriarchal gloss, I mean, you need some counteraction, because it's so defined in terms of sexuality that you have to look at the opposite.
And also, I feel like in my religion, which I loved very much, it didn't tell me what to do with anything. Which is, I think, one reason why the goddess came to me in the midst of a miscarriage, in the midst of my childbearing years, because there was all kinds of joys and griefs and sorrows and pains that I wasn't prepared for, that I felt like the religion that I had been brought up with did not address. So I suppose Lilith and her wildness and her femaleness was the beginning of that for me.
Well, it's a wonderful way to start, because it's such it's not a cliche female at all. I mean, it's a very, as you say, it's just sort of, some of it just came out of your unconscious and created a character that is not just, your ordinary woman.
Yeah, well, she couldn't be on the cover of a magazine, that's for sure.
Well, I don't know, the Wild Mother magazine, I mean, that's
yeah.
He's very
But I think the thing is that what we're talking about over and over, and you with your fiction too, is that exploring different realities, maybe realities that we haven't experienced, or imagining them is important. It's important to imagine.
Yeah, it is. And in different ways and in different voices. I have so many zillions of other questions to ask you, but I noticed it's 11:45. So I'm not sure.
Yeah. Should we ask Jacob if he wants to come?
There he is.
Sure. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the powerful conversation. I just had one comment to begin before reading out some audience questions. You were talking about redemption of the character coming through vulnerability. And that was just a really interesting takeaway I found. And also you talked about how you connect. So the character can redeem through their vulnerability. And also we can connect to the character through vulnerability. And I was reminded of something that David Whyte had said, the poet David Whyte. He said, communication happens on an axis of vulnerability. So I always think,
oh, nice.
Yeah. It's there's trust there. There's a sense of one being able to get in touch with one's own vulnerability as well as the others. Yeah, that's wonderful.
I also forgot, and I even put a bookmark in that I was going to read a paragraph, which I haven't done before. Yeah. So if there is time after question and answer, I'll close with a short paragraph so that people can get a sense of the writing.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. So Dahlia had asked a question. You described the process of entering the character's experience when you write. What is it that you think allows you to be able to do that?
I don't know what I suppose it's my own desire to do it. I think one of the things that certainly I grew up as a fiction reader also, so it didn't seem so strange. I mean, it was just, oh, now I can do it. But I suppose when you read fiction, you always are doing it.
I think that's a wonderful question, by the way.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I don't remember very much about a lot of my classes, but I remember someone talking about Keats's concept of negative capability. And that always stayed with me because that was like, I think I always longed to disappear, and whether it was that I was going to turn into a tree or the wind or a character. I think that what is so delightful about fiction and about maybe meditation, I don't know how people get there, but it's like we think, oh, here I am. This is me and who I know I am and I think I am. But we're all longing to experience ourselves as part of everything and everyone. So I don't know exactly how I do that. It's just that it's also it's very grounding to have a point of view, to say, I mean, it is one of my questions at the beginning of a book. Whose point of view am I writing from? Is it going to be many points of view? Is it going to have whose? Am I going to allow myself to have an omniscient point of view ever? Sometimes, very rarely I've done that. Maeve it was her point of view for 4 books, but she had her ways of her own negative capability where she could see from other points of view. Did you want to say something too, Barbara?
Well, I'm just thinking about getting into a character, and sometimes it's a matter of getting into a rhythm or a voice or a feeling, and just sort of like opening yourself to that character's feeling. And sometimes for me, it's just like free floating. Occasionally, I'll interview a character. I'll say,
"Oh yeah,
you do this," and then they'll say, "Well, because you forced me to it, I never will do it again." You might get all kinds of things from your character.
I like interviewing characters.
I wanted this novel immediately. I never got that, but I could get it. But I mean, somehow it just carries you. And that's that's one of the wonderful flows of writing when that can happen. And you really are carried by an other. And you get, again, your own boundaries expand or dissolve, or however you want to put it. So yeah, I like that question a lot.
Yeah, great question.
It reminds me actually of in like Tibetan Buddhism, in the Vajrayana tradition, they have the deity Avalokiteshvara. It's like Chinrizig, other name for Chinrizig. And I believe I remember hearing like a sort of a translation of the name Avalo. I don't know how you break it down, but it basically meant like one who travels worlds. And so he basically, if you embody him, like his energy of like compassion, you can travel to different realms of like where people are suffering and then be a compassionate presence in those different realms. So it's sort of like the process of fiction and imagination kind of allows you to do that as well, to enter these characters and like you guys were describing, experience their world.
Avalokiteshvara also has multiple hands and multiple heads, and he needed all that to be able to serve and to sort of comprise all these beings where he's traveling. Because you become travel in realms and become other, or you sit it yourself meditating, or however becoming other.
That's also my understanding from my own sort of intuitive, all those conversations that I have and how I ended up back in relationship with Jesus. My understanding is that I would say, well, how come you're bothering with me? I mean, there's all these other people, they're suffering a lot more. And it was explained to me, well, I am the heart of the heart. So you don't have to worry about it. I am the heart of the heart, not just your heart, every heart.
Yes.
Sometimes I'm shut out, sometimes I'm locked in, but that's where I live.
That's lovely.
Heart of the heart. Beautiful. So there was a question, well, I guess kind of on that from Marlies about, there's two parts to it. One is, do you have a favorite biblical story and why? And the other one was like, how do you regard the biblical stories now? Do you see them as divine revelation or fairy tales? Or so there's two questions there.
Oh, that's a great question. I think my favorite gospel is Mark, because there's the least explanation and the least there's the least framework. It's very mysterious. And of course I did kind of spend my life writing the gospel my way, or Maeve's way. So that's a very important story to me. But in terms of biblical stories, one of my favorite stories that I refer to again and again and come back to again and again when I'm working with people is Job. Because that is it's a story where everything is stripped away from him, and he's challenging God, and he's saying, yeah, the wicked do prosper and the innocent suffer, so what's up with that? And he has these comforters who try to tell him, oh, your afflictions are your own fault, which I think we do a lot, blaming the victim. Or you're being taught a lesson and it's for your own good, or you're lucky that this is the only thing that happened to you. God could have been a lot tougher than that. I mean, there's all these things that we say to each other and say to ourselves that are so harsh. And basically, so what Job says is, nope, I'm innocent, and nope, and the wicked do prosper. And, he sticks to his guns, and he doesn't allow himself to be put into those boxes. And then when God answers out of the whirlwind, it's like creation is speaking. And it doesn't really explain it. It just expands it. So I love it that we can't be told, well, it's your own fault. You must have thought a negative thought. No, I didn't. I'm sitting here in my ash heap and I'm going to call him to account. I love that.
I love that too. I think God comes out as a little bit of a patriarchal bully in that one.
Well, God does. I mean,
so powerful.
Sleazy in the beginning, but he comes across as all of creation at the end. I mean, it's creation speaking.
I suppose.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I think isn't the last time God speaks is in the book of Job in the Old Testament. He never talks again.
I didn't know that. That's interesting, because he does have a big mouth.
Yeah, I guess
he's always talking. Yeah.
And so the second part of the question was about how you regard these stories now. Do you see them as revelation or fairy tales, or how?
The biblical stories. I think yeah, that's interesting, because I think that one problem that we have maybe in our whole age is that we're very hung up on facts. Like, this is real, this is not real. And I think that a lot of the people that told the stories or wrote down the stories in the Bible were telling stories because story has mythic truth. So that I think we've gotten hung up on, well, what really happened, and where did Noah's boat end up, and like getting into and there's a place for that, but I think that if a story breaks something open for you or speaks to you, then there is truth in it, and it doesn't matter if it's literally true. I think that in a lot of, I think, well, Maeve was a big suspension of disbelief story. I think, getting back to midrash, there's a Jewish tradition, which is that there's all these gaps in the scripture. Like, okay, so there was two stories of how man was created. And so what happened? Anytime there's a gap in a story, you can make it up.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel that I did it in my book too. It was Buddhist midrash. There's a gap here. What happened to the Buddhist wife? She disappears from the scriptures. So I
think we're allowed to do that. So the big question, that's how I think of those stories. They're wonderful.
Yeah. Plus, when you look at the history of myth, you realize all of these myths have gajillions of versions, and only some of them get passed along. There's a whole tradition in the Bible of Pontius Pilate sort of being redeemed because of people wanting to justify their treatment of the Jews. So let's blame it all on the Jews, and Pilate gets off. And in some traditions, he actually becomes a saint. And God rescues him when Pilate is being martyred by taking his head and ascending his head to heaven. Just his head went to heaven. God. But anyway, so it is amazing that we create these myths to elucidate certain values and to show certain values in action. And I think that's the important part of them, not whether this actually happened. And I think that's where fundamentalism can become extremely harmful, because
we may not know what actually happened, but we can know if a word goes in and touches us.
Right. Yes. And how these values, when they're embodied, come together and synthesize or restrict each other, or and there's the reality there, because we see the feelings, we see what's at stake. And I think that's one of the things that fiction teaches us. What is at stake in this human life? What's it all about?
So would you like to read that paragraph? We're getting close to the time. So,
or if there's no other questions that are burning.
I think, no, it's a good time. Good time.
Okay. So this is when Ione has been missing her mother. She's 10 years old, and she's finally come back. And they haven't even spoken yet. So this is her first seeing of her. At last, Ionia dared to look at her face. The woman's hair swept away from her face as if the wind had blown it back. Her face made Ionia think of the hills under the moonlight as she had seen them that night from her window. Her face was bare and open like the hills, yet at the same time, like them, mysterious and unknowable. Her eyes seemed to see nothing. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking or if she was thinking. All at once, Ionia felt afraid. Not afraid as she was of her father, but afraid as she had been when she thought of the night and the stars existing without her.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for this illuminating conversation about the Wild Mother. It's a wondrous tale.
A lot of other things. We winged it.
You winged it. It was
wild.
Beautifully flowing. And I wanted to remind our attendees that the Wild Mother is available at 10% off through Banyan's website. Just put in the code Wild Mother, one word, and it's available at all times beyond that. So again, thank you for this beautiful conversation, both of you. And
Well, thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Barbara. And yes, one more plug for Barbara's book, Bride of the Buddha. She and Maeve are really good friends. They lived in different times and places, but they...
I think they shared.
I think they're friends with Lilith too, so yeah. And thank you so much. You've been a wonderful host.
Yes, thank you.
It's been great to be here.
Thank everyone for watching.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.